Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. During the Second Sino-Japanese War and until the end of World War II, Unit 731 was the very heart of Japan's top-secret biological warfare program for the Imperial Japanese Army. Located in the puppet state of Manchuria and known by the benign-sounding administrative codename, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, Unit 731's purpose was, in fact, the complete opposite: to conduct biological warfare against Japan's enemies on every front and by every means at its disposal. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned biological and chemical warfare in international armed conflicts, and although the Japanese delegation in attendance at the conference signed the agreement, it was never ratified by the Japanese Diet. As a result, Japan was never bound by this protocol, and several countries who had agreed to the protocol continued developing their own biological and chemical weapons in secret, and Japan was no exception. The civilian test subjects of Unit 731 were usually pregnant women, children, and the elderly, along with criminals, political prisoners, communists, or other undesirable elements of the populace who were considered useful for experiments and rounded up under trumped-up charges. 70% of these victims were Chinese, while others were Korean, Mongolian, and Russian, and a few might have even been Allied prisoners of war. They were called marutas by the researchers, or logs, because the local Manchurians were told that the Unit 731 facility was a lumber mill. Research findings discovered at this facility were occasionally published in peer-reviewed scientific journals where the articles claimed the experiments had been performed on Manchurian monkeys. Whether these prisoners were called logs or monkeys, their suffering was immense. One of the most common experiments at Unit 731 was the vivisection of diseased prisoners. Researchers found the most virulent strains of a disease by infecting prisoners, usually by injecting them with vaccines, or feeding them contaminated food, then killing those prisoners who recovered quickly from their illnesses. They then injected the more potent bacteria or viruses from the sickest prisoners into the next generation of victims. For researchers who wanted to see a more natural progression of a disease, some prisoners were kept locked in cages in the same room as plague-infested mice and fleas to see how long it took for them to become infected. The prisoners were then cut open to see how the disease affected living organs. This vivisection was done without anesthetic to ensure the results were untainted by any external factors. Vivisections were also commonly performed on pregnant women, many of whom were pregnant by rape, and Unit 731 researchers were especially interested in the pregnancies of women with syphilis. This was due in part because the Japanese military was struggling to combat syphilis sweeping through its ranks due to the rape of civilian women and from the comfort women forced to service its soldiers. At first, researchers tried to inject prisoners with syphilis, but seeing that this yielded few results, they turned to raping them. 2 prisoners, one infected with syphilis, were placed in a room together along with armed guards and forced to have sex with each other. Once the previously healthy partners contracted syphilis, they would be inspected periodically to track the progression of the disease, culminating in a vivisection to see what syphilis did to internal organs, and, in the case of pregnant prisoners, the baby. Vivisection was practiced on Chinese citizens at many other government-sponsored research facilities besides Unit 731, and for a time, it was considered the most effective way to train young Japanese medical students on how to perform surgeries correctly. Unit 731 researchers also experimented with methods for treating frostbite. Prisoners were taken outside in freezing weather, sometimes after being dipped in water, and kept there until their limbs were frozen solid. Artificially generated cold air currents accelerated the freezing. A Japanese officer who watched one of these experiments later stated that frostbite was considered achieved if, when struck, the prisoner's limbs made a sound like a wooden board. Sometimes, Prisoners were left to thaw, their arms and legs turning gangrenous until they rotted. Usually, however, frostbite victims were immersed in water at various temperatures to see which temperature cured frostbite the fastest. It is from these tests, run by Unit 731, that the world knows the most effective way to deal with frostbite is not by rubbing the affected limbs, but by immersing them in water between 100 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit. But the main research aim of Unit 731 was to develop the most effective biological warfare weapons. At a testing ground called Anda, prisoners were tied to stakes and suffocated with poison gas or forced to wait while planes dropped bombs full of plague-infested fleas all over them. Prisoners were also used to test the effective range of flamethrowers, chemical weapons, and bacteriological bombs. The shrapnel from these bombs was often infected with different diseases, so that researchers could determine how long it would take for people to die from being hit by flying shrapnel only. Unit 731 also helped develop the balloon bombs sent across the Pacific against the United States to cause destruction and terror. Only a few balloon bombs ever actually arrived in the United States and detonated their payload. And while American news outlets were requested not to report on these bombs for fear of causing mass hysteria, there were 6 American victims killed in Oregon. Unit 731 was also instrumental in planning an Army operation which was never carried out, codenamed Cherry Blossoms at Night, which involved infecting San Diego with the bubonic plague by using kamikaze pilots. This operation was halted in large part by the intervention of Hideki Tojo, a man the United States later hanged for his other war crimes. Other contributing factors to the failure of Cherry Blossoms at Night were the necessity near the war's end for Japan to focus on defense rather than offense, and ultimately the Japanese surrender in August 1945. China, on the other hand, was not so lucky. Using knowledge developed from Unit 731 tests, the Imperial Japanese Army created plague bombs and used airplanes to spray diseases like bubonic plague, cholera, and anthrax over Chinese cities. Plague outbreaks were reported in Chengde in north-central China and Ningbo in eastern China. As a result, between 300,000 and 400,000 Chinese civilians are estimated to have been killed by this method of biological warfare. Unit 731's other experiments included injecting prisoners with animal blood and horse urine, heating them until they died, spinning them in centrifuges until they died, and locking them in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out. It is estimated that over 3,000 people died from the tortures they suffered at the hands of Unit 731. After World War II, the American government helped cover up many of the atrocities the Japanese military committed during the war. The masterminds of Unit 731 were granted immunity during the Tokyo trials in exchange for handing over what data existed from Unit 731 experiments. Many of those affiliated with Unit 731 enjoyed long and illustrious medical careers. 3 Unit 731 researchers became the president of the Japan Medical Association, one the head of the Japan Olympic Committee, and another the governor of Tokyo. In April 2018, a nearly complete list of the 3,607 people employed by Unit 731 was released to the public. In one unique use of this new information, Katsuo Nishiyama, a professor emeritus from Shiga University of Medical Science, used it to invalidate the university degree of a former Unit 731 officer, as it seems the experiments which the man oversaw for his dissertation were likely performed on Unit 731 prisoners rather than on animals, as he had claimed. And while a list of names does not undo years of wartime atrocities, many hope that the release of this list will be a major step towards Japan openly condemning its past wartime actions. For more information about Unit 731, please check out the book produced by Pacific Atrocities Education at pacificatrocities.org/unit-731-ebook.html.